All right, let's get started. Tonight is part 35, and I think the second to last part of our series on the first chapter of Sanhedrin. Whoops, sorry about that. I tried to move the window and I closed it instead. Let's try that one more time. Okay, now I'm sharing the screen so we can all see it together. If you are watching this at some point in the future, I am deborahclapper@gmail.com. The Gemara that we're going to look at tonight is entirely on Sanhedrin 17a, and then there is a little bit more than one class worth of material left in the chapter after this, which I hope we can squeeze into one class, or at most two classes, and then we're going to take a summer break and come back and do a different chapter in the fall. Okay, in the meantime, though, let's remind ourselves what we were doing last time. Last time we met 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the incident in Sefer Bamidbar with Eldad and Medad. Eldad and Medad are the two prophets who are prophesying in the camp while Moshe is busy setting up the new government system with the elders. And Yehoshua comes to Moshe and says, stop them or imprison them or something. The word is a little bit vague. I translated it here as restrain them. And Moshe says, but if only everybody in the Jewish people would prophesy. Okay, so then we spoke last week about the system that Moshe used to decide which 70 elders to get, because 70 is not divisible by 12. So if he took the same number of candidates from each tribe, he would end up with 72 candidates. And then to get 70 elders, he has to exclude 2 people. So he did a lottery. We're going to start tonight with a similar lottery that's actually from this week's Parsha, from Parsha Bamidbar. And then we'll go back to Eldad and Medad for most of the rest of tonight. And then we'll actually move on to the next bit of the Mishnah from our the beginning of the chapter. Okay, so here we are. There's a similar case, similar to the thing that the lottery that we said that Moshe did to get the 70 elders. So this is in the parsha that we're reading this week, and the idea is that the firstborn sons have been until this point the chosen priestly something or others, and they're being replaced by the tribe of Levi. And in order to replace them, Moshe counts how many there are of firstborns and how many there are of Levite men of the right age. And it turns out that they're almost the same number, but it's short by 200 and something. So I got 273. And so the 273 guys who don't have a Levite to exchange themselves with have to pay 5 shekels as a redemption instead. Okay, so that Hashem says in the pasuk, let's see the whole pasuk. Here we are. Let's start with the pasuk before. So I'm starting with pasuk 46. And as for the redemption of the 3 and 70 and 200, that are more than the number of Levites, from the firstborns of the children of Israel, take 5 shekels for each head. Beshekel HaKodesh, measured in the holy shekel. Tikach esrim geira hashekel. You take them and make sure that each shekel is worth 20 geira. Okay, so we have an exchange rate, but there's no instruction on how to choose which of the 22,000 and something firstborns is going to be the one that's going to have to lose the money. And hypothetically, they could have collected money from all 22,000 Levites and then used it to redeem the ones that needed to be redeemed. But that does not seem to be what's happening here. Instead, Amar Moshe, Moshe said, Moshe says, what will I do to Israel? How am I going to make this work? Im Omarlo, if I say to him, Tainli Pidyon Chavetze, to a hypothetical firstborn, you're going to have to give me your redemption money in order to leave. Then Yomarli, he'll say to me, Kfar Pida'ani ben Levi, but I was already redeemed by exchange with a Levite. Because no one's going to want to be one of the 273 guys who has to actually pay money. So what did Moshe do? Hevi 22 alfim pitkin. Ben Levi. He takes 22,000 little bits of parchment and writes son of Levi on each of them. That sounds like a lot of, it's not clear to me why he didn't just leave those 22,000 blank, but be that as it may. He writes son of Levi on the 22,000 bits of parchment. And on the other 273 bits of parchment, he writes 5 shekels on each one. He mixes them together and puts them into a box. Amar Lehen, then he says to the firstborns, take your bit of parchment. Right, so it's gonna feel fair to people because it feels random. For some reason, randomness feels more fair than non-randomness. I'm not entirely sure why that's true, but it does seem to be true. Now, Misha Alavi Ado ben Levi, somebody who pulled up a piece that says son of Levi, Amar lo kfar pida'acha ben Levi. He said to that person, you've been redeemed by being exchanged with a Levite. Misha Alavi Ado chameshet shkalim, Amar lo tain pidyon chavetze. Then somebody who pulled up a bit of parchment that says 5 shekels, he said, you need to pay before you can leave. Rabbi Shimon Omer. So now we are done with the Levites and the firstborns, and we are returning to our topic of Eldad and Medad. We had mentioned, but not really discussed, the fact that Eldad and Medad are described as being left behind in the camp. And we have been working until now on the assumption that that means that they were not invited to go with the group because there was this lottery and they were excluded. But Rabbi Shimon has an alternative suggestion. He says maybe they kept themselves behind in the camp. When Hashem said to Moshe, Esfali Shivim Ish, gather for me 70 men. Amru Eldad u'Medad. Eldad and Medad said to themselves, Ein anu re'uyim lo tagdula. We're not worthy of that. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashem said to them, Ho'il u'miyatetem atzmechem hareini mosif gidula agdulatchem. So Hashem says, since you made yourself smaller, I'm going to make you bigger, and you're going to end up even greater than you would have otherwise if you had gone with the group. So now it seems like Eldad and Medad in this version are staying back voluntarily. Now we didn't, in this version of the story, we don't need a lottery. We just have 2 humble guys who volunteer to not go. And they're rewarded for their humility with prophecy. So what greatness did they have that the people who actually ended up on the Council of Elders did not have? Because all prophets prophesy and then their prophecy stops. And Eldad and Medad prophesied and their prophecy did not stop. Their prophecy was endless. So we are still here in the version of Rabbi Shimon, but we're going to hear a machloket on this topic. So what is it that they were testifying about, or they were prophesying about? Amru Moshe mate Yehoshua machnisat Yisrael. So they said, according to this position, Moshe is dying, or is going to die, and Yehoshua is going to bring the Israelites into the land of Israel. Abba Chanin Omer, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. On the other hand, Abba Chanin says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Al Iske Slav Mitnav. Says they were testifying about the quail, which is about to come, right? This is all in the 11th chapter of Bamidbar, and the quail come right after that. Get you a citation. Right, so God tells Moshe to gather the 70 elders in 11:16, and the quail appear in (11:31), immediately after the conversation about whether Eldad and Medad should be stopped from prophesying, and Moshe gathering the elders as the government. The very next thing that happens is a wind comes up and brings the quail, which the people eat, and God gets angry at them, and then God kills them. Okay, so it's reasonable from a narrative perspective to say that this should be connected to the quail somehow. So Abba Chanin says that, and Rabbi Eliezer said that they went into some sort of trance and said, come up quail, and then the quail appeared. That does not seem like the sort of prophecy that would, none of these actually so far seem like the sort of prophecy that would go on forever. Those actually seem like sort of time-bounded, specific prophecies. But it may be that they prophesied about other things after that, especially in the case of the quail, because that's very time limited. Rav Nachman Amar, Rav Nachman said, Al Iske Gog Magog Hayu Mitnabi. So Rav Nachman says, I'm sorry, it's Rav Nachman. I typed that wrong. I apologize. That's what I get for not editing properly. In any case, Rav Nachman says they're prophesying about the war of Gog Magog, which is supposed to be the war that's supposed to precede the end of days. And he has a pasuk for this. So as it says in Yechezkel, Lamed Chet Yud Zayin, and I'm going to get the whole pasuk in my Tanakh here so that I can read it without making a mistake. Koamar Hashem Elokim. Right? This is what Hashem God says. Atahu asher dibarti bayamim kadmonim. Are you the one that I spoke about in the ancient days? Biyad avadai nevi'ei Yisrael, in the hands of my servants, the prophets of Israel. Hanib'im bayamim hahem, who prophesied in those days. Shanim might mean years. Lehavi otcha alehem, to bring you on them, right? So Hashem says here in Yechezkel, is this the thing that I used to tell my ancient prophets about? So that seems like it's saying that there's somebody ancient who prophesied about the same things that Yechezkel is prophesying about. And there's this weird word shanim here, which seems, in the way that the vowels are in our Tanakh, to be they prophesied in those days for years. But if you had different vowels, you could read it as shnaim, and you could say they prophesied in those days, the two of them. And that is what we're going to do. So al tikri shanim el shnai. Don't read years. Instead, read it as two. And where do we see two prophets who prophesied the same prophecy together? That seems like a description of Eldad and Medad. So we said back in our last share, and also up above in tonight's, all the other prophets prophesied and didn't stop. Sorry, prophesied and stopped, and they prophesied and did not stop. Minal de Pasku. So how do we know that the other prophets, and in particular the elders that Moshe is choosing here in Bamidbar 11, how do we know that they in fact only prophesied temporarily? So if you say that it's from this verse, we're going to have a problem. This pairing of ilema, if you say, and ela me'ata, then you're going to need to also say, tells me that there's some bit of logic here that would work in the first case, but if I use it in the first case, I'm going to be forced to be consistent, and that's going to create a problem somewhere else. Okay, so if we say that it's from the pasuk, vayitnabu v'lo yasafu, they prophesied and did not something, let's for right now assume that it means it's from the root yud samach pei, and it means they did not continue. Then in that case, ela me'ata, I'm going to have to read the following verse this same way. And this verse is from the description of the giving of the Torah in Devarim. So we're at Devarim 5:18. Except it's not. Hold on a second. Well, that's embarrassing. And that's the wrong citation. Yeah, it's verse 19. It's not verse 18. I'm sorry. Okay, so nonetheless, it says, "Et hadvarim ha'ela diber Hashem al kol kahalchem behar." These things God spoke to all of your community at the mountain. Mitoch ha'esh ha'anan v'ha'arafel, from the fire and the cloud and the darkness. Kol gadol v'lo yasaf, a big voice that did not something, but whatever it is, it's the same thing that the prophets did not do back in Bamidbar 11. So if we read that as they did not continue, then we're going to have to read this as a big voice that did not continue, which sounds a lot like, that doesn't sound right. It should be something impressive and loud in order to fit into this context, not a voice that just like abruptly stops. So we're going to have to read this not as being from the Shorish Yud Samach Pei, but as being from the Shorish Samach Vav Pei, so that Velo Yasafu in Bamidbar 11 means, and they did not stop, and in Devarim 5 is going to mean that the voice of God did not stop. Okay, well, did not stop is exactly the opposite of what we were trying to prove for our elders in Bamidbar 11. So we're going to have to try again. Rather, in fact, learn it from this writing. It says, Vayitnabu, and they prophesied. On the other hand, Hatam Ktiv, over there, a few verses later, it says, Mitnabim, they are prophesying. So the Eldad and Medad get to prophecy in the present tense, whereas the elders prophecy only in the past tense. That makes it sound like, from the perspective of the author and or the reader of the book, the elders have already finished prophesying and Eldad and Medad are still prophesying. So that seems like a distinction between the two that we could hold up as Eldad and Medad didn't stop and the other prophets did. Excuse me. Okay, so Adayin not be the whole thing. So when it uses the present tense, that means there's still prophecy. Okay, so now we're going back a moment in our minds to the dispute about what they're prophesying about. Remember, we had a three-way dispute. There is Number one is Moshe is dying and Yehoshua is going to take us into the land. Number two is they're instructing the quail to show up, or prophesying that it's about to show up. And number three is they're prophesying about the future war of Gog and Magog. Okay, so the Gemara says, Bishlam alamanda amar Moshe meet. I understand what's going on, according to the one who says that the prophecy is that Moshe is going to die. I knew dichtiv Adoni Moshe Klaim. That explains why Yehoshua says, my master Moshe, stop them. Ella lamanda amar hanach tarti. But for the authors of the other two positions, the one who says that they're talking about the war of Gog and Magog, and the one that says that they're summoning quail, my Adoni Moshe Klaim, why would Yehoshua want Moshe to stop them? In the case of the quail, it seems like it's, the answer to what people have been asking for. They've been demanding meat. And in the case of Gog and Magog, it seems like it's the very distant future and it shouldn't be such a pressing issue. And besides, it's about salvation. So what's that bad? So they end up having to say that it's not then about the content, it's about the idea. The lav orach ara, because it's rude. It's not polite. The havale ketalmid hamoreh halacha lifnei rabo, because it's like a student who teaches halacha in front of his teacher. And we saw this, a few months ago when we were talking about ordination, about smicha. And we saw that there's this idea that unless you've been specifically given permission by your teacher, you are not allowed to teach halacha while he's alive or in his place, or whatever it is that in front of means. And that's what ordination is public formal permission to teach even with the existence of your teacher. So Eldad and Medad prophesying with Moshe alive and present in the camp is rude, and they don't have permission, and they shouldn't. That Yehoshua just thinks it's a breach of protocol more than anything else. It's not about what they're saying. Okay, so in that case, now I understand something else. So now I understand, according to the ones who said the other two, right, the quail or the war of Gog and Magog. That's why Moshe says, if only everyone in the camp were a prophet. Right? Let's actually see this. It's a very lovely sentiment from Moshe Rabbeinu. Here we are, Midbar 11:29. Vayomer lo Moshe hamakane atali. Moshe says to him, "Are you jealous for me? Umitain kol am Hashem niviim. If only all of the people of God would be prophets, ki yitain Hashem et rucho alehem, and God would put His Spirit on them." Right? That goes nicely with if they're talking about something that's not particularly fraught. Ela lamande amar Moshe mate. But according to the people who say that the prophecy here of Eldad and Medad is about Moshe dying, it would be one thing for Moshe to say, oh, let them go, it's okay, at least they're communicating with God. But for him to say, I wish everybody would have that prophecy, that seems a little odd, honestly, because he probably doesn't wish that everybody were running around the camp prophesying his imminent death. That doesn't sound like the sort of thing that one wishes for. So, Elalamanda Amar Moshe mate. Sorry, I read that right. Lo saimuha coming. So it must be that in that case, they came and reported to Moshe that Eldad and Medad were prophesying, but they didn't tell him what they were saying. So he doesn't know what the prophecy is. As far as he knows, they're just generically prophesying. And so his answer is, oh, I wish God would talk through all of the children of Israel. And in fact, he does wish that, in part because he doesn't know the context. So in that case, what is it Yehoshua is asking for when he says restrain them? Now, it's important to keep in mind that whatever he's asking for, he doesn't get it. Right? Moshe says no. He says he won't restrain them because he thinks that as many people as possible should be prophets. But what was Yehoshua asking for? And it's kind of interesting because He says, Amar le hatel alehem tzarchei tzibur v'hem kalim elehem. Yoshua, maybe we get a little bit of insight into his own feelings about his own position of leadership here. He says, put some responsibility for the community on them, and they'll stop all by themselves. So I see a couple of things here. One of them is that, remember a few moments ago, we were saying that the elders who are actually going to end up as the elders of the camp prophesy briefly, and then they stop. And Eldad and Medad prophecy forever. So it sounds like we're saying the reason Eldad and Medad are able to prophecy forever is actually a direct result of the fact that they're not elders, because they don't have anything else to do. If they had all these responsibilities to worry about and to be concerned with, they wouldn't be able to spend all of their time prophesying. They'd be too distracted. On the other hand, it also sounds like you can sort of hear in the background here, both are imagining of Yehoshua thinking to himself, if I didn't have to take responsibility for these people, I could have a religious life of my own. And maybe even, that if Moshe didn't have responsibility for these people, imagine how much of a religious life he could have on a personal level. But also the rabbis who are writing this, you can almost hear them saying, the burden of running this community is stopping me from having a personal relationship with God in a way that feels sometimes like a punishment, which I find kind of intriguing. But I also find it intriguing that nobody thinks that what they're supposed to do is lock up Eldad and Medad. Although it might be that we don't think that because we don't think it would work. Right? Locking people up does not stop them from thinking. You want to stop someone from thinking, you have to distract them. Okay, so now we move on to our
Deborah, just 2 seconds. I'm sorry, I missed it.
Sure.
Exactly what responsibilities?
So it
is this
say,
referring to? I know, but what's the implication?
It doesn't seem to matter. Make them responsible for some communal need, and that will overwhelm them, and then they won't be able to get anything done anymore. I don't think it makes a difference what communal need it is.
Okay. I thought originally it was referring to something specific. Okay.
I don't think, it can't be whatever it is that the elders are supposed to be dealing with, because we seem to have decided that there can only be 70 guys in charge of that, whatever.
Right.
But we had a camp with 2 million people in it. There must be something we could make them do.
Okay.
Okay, so in the part of the Mishnah that we've been loosely commenting on, the next thing that happened is that the Mishnah derived maybe I should read to you from the Mishnah. The next thing that happened is that the Mishnah derived from the verses about putting somebody to death. It derived that we need 20 judges on the court. Let me call this up. And then it derived that we needed 3 more. And it's the logic for the last 3 that we're interested in. So, okay, so the verses we need to look at are in this footnote. The Midbar 35, 24, and 25. So let's go there. Okay, so we're talking, in fact, here about trying to tell the difference between an accidental murderer and a deliberate murderer. And in that context, it says, V'shaftu ha'edah, the congregation will judge, ben hamaket uven goel hadam. They'll judge between the assailant, I guess we'll call him because we're not sure he's a murderer yet, and the blood redeemer. Blood redeemer is the relative of the dead guy. Al hamishpatim ha'ela, about these laws. Then v'hitzilu ha'edah et harotzeach miyad goel hadam. The congregation will rescue the murderer from the hand of the blood redeemer. Veheshivu oto ha'eda el ha'ir miklato, and they'll return him to his city of refuge, Asher Nas Shama, that he had fled to it. The Ashav ba'admot Kohen Hagadol, and he'll have to live there until the Kohen Gadol dies. So if the court decides that it's an accidental killing, then they're going to rescue the murderer from the relatives of the dead person who want to kill him, send him back to his Ir Miklat. The truth is that even if they decide that he's a deliberate murderer, they're also going to rescue him from the Goel Hadam. It's just that they're going to rescue him from the Goel Hadam in order to kill him, which is like less of a rescue. But in any case, the word Eidah appears twice there. The Eidah is going to judge, and then the Eidah is going to rescue. And an Eidah, as we I think have mentioned before, is also the word that we use to derive a minion. And so an Eidah is often, not always, we've also seen the word Eidah mean 70 elsewhere in this Mishnah, but most of the time an Eidah is a minion. So we have two Eidahs, that's 20. Okay, so the Mishnah says we have 20 judges. Uminayin lahavi od asara. How do we know that we're going to bring 3 more? That's the quote our Gemara begins with here. Mimash mashene'amar lo tia acharei rabim laraot. Right, there's a pasuk which we have seen before, and we've learned a number of different ways of reading it. But the way we're going to read it this evening is don't follow a simple majority to convict. So we're going to take from that you need a majority of 2 in order to convict. All right, so you need 2 more people voting for conviction than you have voting for acquittal in order to convict. Now, the problem is, as the Gemara is about to point out, that does not get you 3 more. 3 more, in fact, if supposing that in order for these psukim to make sense, you need 10 trying to convict and 10 trying to acquit. If you want a difference of 2 between those 2 numbers, 10 to 12 would work, 11 to 13 would work, but those would get you 22 judges and 24 judges. That neither of them gets you 23 judges. Okay, so back in our Gemara, it says sof sof l'ra'al pishnayim lo mishkacha. So in the end, we don't find that you can convict using a majority of 2. If you had 11 voting to acquit, vishnei masar mechayvim, and you have 12 voting to convict, akati chadhu, there's only a majority of 1. 12 is only 1 more than 11. On the other hand, if you have 10 voting to acquit and 13 voting to convict, then that's now a majority of 3. And those are the only 2 possibilities that you can have, because we seem to be assuming you need to have at least 10 on each side. At least, I don't know if you need that in order to finish a case, but you do need it in order for this pasuk to be fulfilled, because it has 10 judging. I think they think that means convicting, and 10 rescuing. And I think they're reading that very plausibly as acquitting. So so it doesn't seem like we can have 10 on 10 plus a few more and end up with a difference of 2 between the 2 numbers.
Is simple majority understood throughout Gemara as meaning 2? How do you know simple majority would 3?
A simple majority would just be more, right? 12 to 11 is a majority. But we've decided that you can't convict in a capital case with just a majority. You need more than a majority. So what's more than a majority? 2 more is the minimum, since people don't come in fractional parts.
So why doesn't 10 versus 13 work? So what if it's a majority?
You can totally convict someone that way. But it doesn't prove to me that I need 23 judges. Because if I only have 10 people voting to acquit, I only need 12 more in order to vote to convict. So a panel of 22 would do just fine.
I see.
And somehow the Mishnah thinks it can use this to prove that you need 23 judges.
I see.
But
Okay.
we don't see how that's necessary.
Okay.
So Amar Rabbi Abahu. Abahu says, "Iata motzei ela b'mosifin v'divrei hakol." Rabbi Abahu says you can't actually find it except in a case of mosifin, except in a case where you're adding more judges because the panel is deadlocked. Because you might want say, well, okay, what happens if you don't get a majority of 2, right? So the answer is we keep adding 2 more judges over and over again until we get either a majority for acquittal or a supermajority for conviction. So in the event that you had 11 voting to convict and 11 voting to acquit, and one person who says, I can't make up my mind, so you add 2 more judges, and now, in effect, you have a panel of 24, and you can have 13 to 11 to convict. Okay, and he says that works according to everybody. Uve Sanhedrin Gdola, and he says, and on the great Sanhedrin, it can also work according to Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda says that you only have 70 on the great Sanhedrin. Remember, everybody else said you have 71. But what you need in order to make this happen is, and ironically, because we've been doing our level best to avoid it for 35 classes, what you need in order to end up with a majority of 2 is an even number to start with. And an even number to start with is exactly what we usually avoid. Rabbi Abahu says there are 2 ways you can get that. Either you can get it by having a deadlocked group and you have to add more, and we always add more in pairs. And we're going to conclude in a second, dismiss the person who couldn't make up their mind. So that's what really gets you the even number. Or he says, Rabbi Yehuda is always okay with that because he has an even number on his normal great Sanhedrin. The Amar Rabbi Abahu b'mosifin osin beit din shakul lechatchila. And Rabbi Abahu says when we're adding, we on purpose produce a court with an even number. That's okay to do to begin with on purpose. And the Gemara says, wait a minute, Pshita, that's obvious. You don't need to tell me that you can make there be an even number. As if we're gonna add people in pairs, once somebody can't make up their mind, you're always gonna end up with an even number that way. That's taking an even number and adding another even number, that's always an even number. So that's obvious. So the Gemara says, no, wait a minute. Mahudatema, what might you have said that would have gotten you an odd number? You might have said, Haidek Amar Eini Yodea, the guy who said, I don't know, that person Kiman de Ite Dami, that we might still count him. He's counted as present. V'amar Milta Shma'inanle, and we might even still listen to him if he makes an argument. Maybe we'd even let him vote, although it doesn't say that. But Kamash Malan, we conclude from this that Rabbi Abahu is telling us the Haidek Amar Eini Yodea, the guy who says, I don't know, Kaman delete dam. He's as if he's not there. Ve'i Amar Tama lo shma'inanle. If he says something about a reason why we should convict or acquit, we ignore him. He's not part of the process anymore. Once you refuse to vote, you're no longer on the court. And that is what Rabbi Abahu is telling us by telling us we can have an even number, is he's telling us if you had an odd number and then one person says that they can't make a decision, that's okay, ignore him, add 2 more, you'll have an even numbered court, but that's fine, don't worry about it. You don't need to add in odd numbers at that point in order to fix the problem. Okay, that is what I had for the evening. Are there questions?
No more from me.
Okay. We have no class a week from tonight because it's Yom Tov. And then 2 weeks from tonight, which I think is the 13th, we will, I hope, have our last class before the summer. If I can't squeeze it into one class, we'll have one more on the 20th. Okay, thank you so much.
How much of a summer break? Are we taking the whole summer? Last year, I think you started back in August.
Yeah, I definitely want to start back in August. I will probably be out of town the first week in August, so probably not quite that early, but after that, but I need to figure that out.
Sure, no problem. No problem.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Thank you.